Hey, what's up? It's cute what if? This side. Today we will be seeing what if Deku met the elemental hero Gaea. Before we move ahead with the FIC, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for future what ifs like this. Yin's quirk was called Elements. She could control the 4 basic elements: fire, air, water, and earth. To activate an element, she had to be in contact with it for at least 1 second. Once activated, she could use that element for up to 10 minutes. Air was her usual choice because she was always in contact with it. Yin could unleash powerful gusts of air from her mouth or palms. She could force air from her feet to propel herself into flight, though it cost stamina. By spinning rapidly while expelling air from her hands, she could create tornadoes, their size limited by her strength and endurance. She could form razor-like air blades from her arms, but she avoided using those because they were potentially lethal. With earth, she could shape terrain with thought. She could make roots or tendrils rise from the ground to entangle or trap someone, a useful ability for immobilizing targets. This element could not be used while she was submerged in water. Water was her second most powerful element, though using it outside of a water source dehydrated her quickly. She always carried a water bottle for that reason, and drinking a little improved her control. She could manipulate water much as she did air, creating limbs or tendrils to drag opponents, or moving fluidly and breathing easily while submerged. Her usual non-lethal tactic to incapacitate a villain was to encase their head in water briefly until they were unable to continue fighting. She promised herself she would only use that against villains. Fire was the most dangerous part of her repertoire. She could shoot medium and small flames from her palms and mouth. Her flames were purple in color, and when intense emotions, pain, anger, or grief overwhelmed her, the flames could flare white and become far stronger. That heightened power came at a cost. Prolonged use burned the places where the flames originated and left her more vulnerable. Because of that risk, she rarely relied on fire around friends. Activating the elements. Air required no preparation. Earth activated when she touched the ground with her hand. For water, she kept a water bottle and could either pour a little into her hand or drink a sip. Drinking gave her better endurance. For fire, she kept at least 2 lighters. Lighting one and briefly touching the flame was enough to bring the power under her control. Extras and limitations. She could combine water and air to summon storms, an effect limited by strength and stamina and usable only outdoors. A water and earth combo could create mud to trap foes. Her quirk's drawbacks included burns from the flames and the risk of dizziness or fainting from exhaustion. Character profile. Yin, last name withheld, operated under the hero named Gaea. She was a little short but fit, with eye color and hair features that made her distinctive. Her hair tips dyed half red and half blue. She could be brusque at times because of complicated family issues, but she could also be warm and vulnerable when she wanted to be. She was intelligent, trained hard, and had entered UA by recommendation. High anxiety and stress were constant companions. She coped by dancing and playing instruments, though she could not sing well. She lived with her father and brother after her mother, also a hero, had been killed by a villain when Yin was 6. Her father, a top-ranked hero, held high expectations but tried to be a decent parent. Her brother, a third-year hero student at UA, was overprotective and fiercely loyal. Yin still visited her mother's grave every Sunday morning and aspired to live up to her legacy. Her quirk's drawbacks included nosebleeds and occasional loss of consciousness. Some years ago, she became aware that she was blindfolded and that her hands were bound to a chair. The room was dark, but her quirk told her there were 2 other people present. Terrified, she called out for her mother and father. A woman claiming to be her mother soothed her, saying not to worry and that they only had to wait for her father. An unknown man interrupted sharply and said it was time for their daughter to see everything. Footsteps approached, and she felt her blindfold being removed. As her eyes adjusted to the light, she saw a tall man dressed in black with his face covered standing over her. Yin sat in an old room, blindfolded, and realized with dull panic that her mother was blindfolded as well. Her mother begged Danzo not to touch her daughter and pleaded for him to spare the child. Danzo ignored the plea and moved closer, his fingers glowing with heat as if a dangerous power gathered at his touch. He demanded information from YN's mother and threatened consequences when she refused. YN did not understand what was happening and asked her mother what was wrong. Her mother tried to calm her, but the tension in the room only grew. Danzo announced that he would hurt her if she did not cooperate. He then used his quirk to inflict a scorching pain on YN. She screamed as a sudden burning sensation washed over her, and tears formed in her eyes. Danzo sneered at her reaction, then returned his attention to YN's mother and intensified his assault on her. YN's mother refused to give him what he wanted. Danzo responded by using his power against her, and YN watched helplessly as her mother fell. Her mother, struggling to breathe, told YN that she was strong and full of untapped power and that she should be happy and brave. Those were her final words. Danzo exhaled a dark smoke that overwhelmed the room, and YN slipped into unconsciousness after taking a last look at her mother. A week later in the hospital, YN woke to a beeping sound and noticed bandages on her arm and leg. Her brother ran out of the room to fetch the doctors, and her father, looking exhausted, sat at her bedside. He hugged her when she opened her eyes and tried to steady her. When YN asked about her mother, her father told her that her mother had not survived. The world shattered for YN in that moment. She blamed herself and felt the weight of the loss. After the doctors and police had come and gone, YN remembered her mother's last words about having great power to discover. In that instant she vowed not to cry anymore until she had avenged her by bringing Danzo down. She promised herself she would train 3 times harder than anyone else to become the best. In the present, YN's routine began early. Her brother woke her for their morning training, and she hauled herself out of bed, checking the clock to find she had just enough time to eat and dress for the session. Her brother teased her for taking too long, and she responded with a sleepy retort. He reminded her of their father's absence. Their father would be home in 3 days. They headed to the garden to begin training. Later that morning, YN received a call from the house to go to their father's office. She climbed the stairs and knocked. Their father invited her in. He commented gently that she could present herself more neatly and urged her to keep up a good image. He then handed her an envelope from UA and explained that she had been accepted into Class 1A by recommendation. He reminded her that acceptance did not mean she could slack in her training and that he expected her to be at least as successful as her brother. YN acknowledged him and resolved to meet those expectations. I excused myself and left his office with the letter in my hand, wondering what Class 1A was capable of. Walking to the kitchen for something to eat, she saw her brother sitting on the sofa and decided to annoy him. She called for Kakashi, and he responded without taking his eyes off the TV, asking what she wanted. She asked what day of the week it was. He answered that it was Wednesday, and she erupted into a ridiculous chant that made him groan in embarrassment. He reacted dramatically about how humiliating she was and worried aloud about his reputation if they arrived at UA together on Monday. She wondered aloud whether a reputation could even go negative, and he swore at her. She waved and said she loved him, then ran off. A few days later, tired and anxious about the first day of school, she tried to keep calm. Deep breaths. The uniform looked nice, but the blazer felt restrictive across her broad shoulders from all the muscle she'd gained from gymnastics. She decided she could skip wearing it. The UA building was huge, and the thought of getting lost spiraled into a silly survival fantasy. If she disappeared, everyone would think she was dead until she had become some fierce street survivor. Her brother brushed off the sighs, reminding her he had been attending the school for 3 years, then hurried off to meet his friends while warning her not to do anything that might damage his reputation. He dropped his house keys on the way, and she sprinted back to return them, shouting for her older brother as she ran. He looked startled when she handed the keys back. She introduced herself to his group, smiling warmly. A lavender-haired girl complimented her appearance and compared her to Kakashi, which made her want to give him a hard time, though the girl seemed nice. One of Kakashi's friends relayed that their father had told him he was grounded for a tantrum over bedsheets, and everyone laughed at his expression. She said goodbye and ran again. Inside the building, she followed a red-haired student who was telling a black-haired one that the Class 1A room was around the corner. When her nerves spiked at the classroom door, she fished out her phone and listened to music until she felt ready to go in. She found a seat in the third row, in the middle, and settled in. She felt someone too close beside her and turned to see a boy behaving inappropriately. She asked him to move away. A black-haired girl nearby thanked her and introduced herself as Yaoyorozu Momo. The narrator smiled and introduced herself in return. The boy seated directly in front had blonde hair with a black lightning-shaped streak. He turned around, introduced himself as Kaminari Denki, and tried a playful line. She replied dryly and then gave a mischievous retort about scraping her knee coming out of hell. Kaminari responded by saying that was why she stood out. She was about to answer when the classroom door opened and a large figure in a yellow sleeping bag entered. I was convinced I was going to take a quirk test. My brother had taken one in his first year and placed 5th, so I needed to be ranked 5th or higher. It sounded easy enough. I had been training hard for this. There were 2 things I hadn't expected. Aizawa had warned us that the last-ranked person would be expelled, but that felt like a scare tactic. The threat would only make everyone push harder, which would make it more difficult to place higher. The other surprise was more personal. My father was the 3rd-ranked hero and was close with the 2nd-ranked hero, Endeavor. My brother, my father, and I had spent a lot of time at Endeavor's house. I had known Todoroki essentially my whole life. I had not expected him to be in the same class as me. We had trained together a lot over the last 3 years, so we were evenly matched in hand-to-hand combat. If Todoroki could let go of his family issues, we could be an amazing team. I kept teasing him about his control over his fire quirk and hoped he might teach me some techniques, even though he was stubborn about it. Midnight had been part of my life almost as long as I could remember. She was like an older sister to me. We shopped together and talked about everything. She had been the reason I ended up at UA. My father had wanted me to attend Shiketsu High School where he had gone, but Midnight had convinced him otherwise. Time passed, and it was soon time for the ball pitch. By my count I was around 3rd or 4th, so things were going well. The ball pitch was the last event, and I was relieved I really needed to use the restroom, and Aizawa probably wouldn't allow a break in the middle of the trials. Aizawa called my name repeatedly, but I remained dozing and didn't respond. He muttered about how I always nodded off anywhere. When someone finally shook me awake, I panicked and blurted that I needed to get to the ladies' room, then realized I had said the wrong thing in front of everyone. Aizawa reminded me I was up. He then told me that after I finished I could go to the bathroom, and gave me a small, teasing smile that made me flush with embarrassment. Before I grabbed the ball, I took a quick sip from the water bottle in my pocket. Others looked puzzled, but water always seemed to strengthen me a little. I gripped the ball, took a deep breath, and released a powerful gust, propelling it with a burst of air from my hand. The ball sailed and finally fell after several seconds. Aizawa showed the distance on his phone. The reading was 2,784.7 meters, which drew murmurs of disbelief from the crowd. People said I had the 2nd-best score after Uraraka. I turned to Aizawa and asked if I could go to the bathroom now. He said I had 2 minutes and urged me to hurry. Panic flared. 2 minutes felt impossible. Before I could complain further, Momo offered a solution, suggesting I use the changing room restrooms since they were closer. I thanked her and ran. After the trials concluded, Aizawa announced the results. Momo was 1st and I was 2nd. I felt proud. I could finally brag to my brother that I had beaten him. Aizawa revealed that the expulsion line had been a ruse to motivate us, so no one would actually be expelled. A collective laugh and relieved sighs went through the students. Before lunch, I received a message from my brother. He said he was going home earlier because he didn't have the last class and asked if I wanted him to tell their driver to pick me up later. I replied that I would walk to be more environmentally friendly. He teased about the environment in return, and I told him to stop showing off over text. As I left the classroom, 2 boys approached me. Kaminari Denki introduced himself and Hantasiro and asked if I would like to have lunch with them. Before I could respond, Mina ran up and introduced herself enthusiastically, asking to join in. Kaminari nodded, and Mina took my arm, pulling me along toward the cafeteria. When they found a place to sit, Kirishima and Bakugo appeared. Kirishima asked if he and Bakugo could join our table. Bakugo snapped that he was not asking anything and that nobody had said they wanted him there, and he insulted the group in his usual blunt manner. I reacted with a slightly threatening tone, asking who he thought he was calling an extra. They locked eyes for a few seconds, both with intense expressions until Bakugo made a dismissive sound and sat beside Kirishima. Everyone else at the table watched them with some apprehension, except Kirishima, who looked unfazed. Mina, sitting next to the protagonist, asked to exchange numbers. The protagonist nodded and handed over the phone. Mina did the same. Mina's phone was rose gold with a sparkly pink case. After they swapped numbers, the group returned to eating until Kaminari suggested they exchange numbers as well. The protagonist declined, saying they did not feel comfortable after his earlier behavior. Kaminari looked briefly disappointed but then asked Mina for the protagonist's number. The protagonist told Mina she could share it if she wanted and that they could always block him later, smiling slightly while chewing. Everyone except Bakugo laughed. Home after school, the protagonist knocked on their father's office door and entered when he invited them in. Their father sat behind his desk with a computer and asked how the first day had been. He asked if the protagonist had already made friends, and the protagonist confirmed, noticing a small proud smile from their father. Their father mentioned that the protagonist's brother had said they were in Aizawa's class and asked if they had received mixed sunglasses contact yet. The protagonist shook their head and said they wanted to make contacts on their own. Their father respected that reasoning. He then asked about the quirk test ranking. When the protagonist replied that they had placed second, his expression shifted to serious. He reminded them that he had trained them to aim for first and urged them not to disappoint him. The protagonist promised to try harder and then excused themselves to their room. In the instruments room, the protagonist put on rose gold headphones, sat behind the drums, and enclosed the space so no sound escaped. They pressed play and played along with the opening theme from Noragami Arigoto, finding that loud music and drumming helped calm their anxiety. After 2 hours, the music had done its work and they felt less anxious. They removed their headphones and collapsed onto the bed just as a message arrived from an unknown number, addressing them as Scraped Knee Demon. They did not recognize the number at first, but then realized it was Kaminari, who had gotten their number from Mina. Kaminari confirmed his identity, changed the contact name to Pikachu, and sent a playful message asking what they were doing. The protagonist braced for a long night of conversation. A short while later, between classes, the students lingered in the classroom while waiting for the next lesson to start. Ida insisted that everyone sit down because the teacher would arrive soon and motioned in a strict, precise way. He demanded that the protagonist get off the table where they had been sitting with Mina. The protagonist ignored him, since they were planning to go out to a nearby cafe after classes. Suddenly All Might appeared at the classroom door. Everyone took their seats as he explained the exercise for the day and then announced the distribution of super suit bags. The students collected their suits and changed. The protagonist's suit had been designed by them and Midnight. It was a midnight blue, knee-length bodysuit made from fireproof material that did not soak through. A bandana around the neck was intended for use during vortex-based moves to protect against debris. The shoes had no laces for speed and convenience, and their soles included openings that allowed the protagonist to channel air to fly. A strap on the leg held matches and lighters for use with their quirk. She kept the suit on to cover the scar from the accident, but she thought no one in class needed to know. Mina complimented YN's suit and YN thanked her, returning the compliment on Mina's colorful outfit. YN noticed how lively Mina had become. As YN was leaving the changing room, she saw Ochako and remembered that Midnight had told her about the company that made her suit. YN pointed out the 2 matching dots on both suits to Ochako and showed her pride in the coincidence. Ochako agreed that it was cute. They drew lots to see who would be partnered for the exercise. YN found out she and Kaminari were paired together. Kaminari slipped an arm onto YN's shoulder and called her by the nickname he always used. YN reminded him that she had told him not to call her that and pushed his arm away. She observed that she had better luck than Momo, who had been paired with a flirtatious partner. Kaminari wondered if a previous comment had been an actual compliment, and YN denied it. Their opponents were Todoroki and Ojiro, who would be acting as heroes while YN and Kaminari played the villains. Before the match began, Kaminari asked YN if she had a strategy. YN explained that she had a plan that would give them an initial advantage. She reminded him that during the quirk test Todoroki had only used his ice side, and that he could also use fire, although he usually did so only when necessary. She explained that Todoroki would likely attempt to freeze the area, including their feet. Kaminari finished her sentence, clarifying that they would pretend not to move. Yen confirmed that they should stay still when the ice came and not panic. She continued that she could unfreeze herself and Kaminari briefly using her fire so they could move while the rest of the area remained frozen, allowing them to surprise Todoroki. Kaminari praised the plan. Yen added that when she melted the ice it would turn to water and she could use that water to her advantage, and she reached into a leg pouch to retrieve a spare lighter, tossing it to Kaminari. She explained that Todoroki would likely try to take her lighter to prevent her from using fire, so she had given him a backup. Yen instructed Kaminari that if Todoroki took the lighter, he should reignite it and touch her with the flame for at least 1 second to allow her to activate her element-related ability. He asked whether the flame would burn her, and Yen reassured him that the flame would need to be much hotter to cause harm. The alarm that signaled the start of the exercise sounded. Yen told Kaminari to hand over the lighter, and because they were close he immediately touched her with the flame while slipping the lighter into his jacket pocket. Seconds later they were frozen up to their ankles. Yen focused and began to unfreeze the area around them. Once she finished, Yen announced that she was done unfreezing. The water covered a little above their ankles. Yen asked Kaminari to use his communication earpiece to listen to Todoroki and Ojiro. Kaminari reported that the two opponents were separated and still had 4 floors to go to reach them, but that Todoroki could move quickly on his ice and Ojiro could advance with his tail. Yen reminded Kaminari not to discharge electricity into the water, since that would risk shocking anyone touching it. He acknowledged the warning and they prepared to win, Kaminari's hands glowing faintly with electricity as he steadied himself. Yen returned a confident smile. They waited for Todoroki and Ojiro to arrive. Kaminari watched Yen while they waited. Half of her multicolored hair was tied into 2 buns on top of her head and the other half fell to her shoulder blades. Her costume fit her form in a practical way that showed she was athletic and well-trained. It emphasized her strength and mobility rather than being revealing. He noted her lean, well-conditioned build, which was consistent with someone accepted into the program on recommendation. One detail bothered him: a bandage wrapped around her upper arm that seemed to hide something. He resolved to ask her about it later. A loud sound from just outside the room announced that the exercise had begun. Yen turned her head to Kaminari and nodded with a small, confident smirk, ready for the confrontation. We both got into our fighting stances as soon as Todoroki and Ojiro barged into the room. Yen ran to Todoroki while I backed up toward the false bomb to protect it. When Ojiro spotted me, he came running in my direction. When I reached Shoto, I tried to kick him in the side, but he caught my feet and tried to spin me into the air. I sent a small strand of air from my feet into his grip, freed myself, and we both jumped back, walking in circles without taking our eyes off each other. Yen pointed out that his first ice move had been obvious, and I attempted a punch that he easily dodged. Todoroki admitted the move was meant to test her control and willingness to use her fire near someone. He explained that he wanted to see if she could fight in ice without losing control. His explanation surprised me and distracted me long enough for him to land a kick to my gut that pushed me closer to the fake bomb. I needed to get away from the device, and suspected he was doing that on purpose. I also noticed that the sounds of Kaminari and Ojiro's fight had gone quiet. When both Todoroki and I looked back toward them, we saw that somehow they had knocked themselves out. I face-bombed, annoyed at their clumsiness. Todoroki advanced toward me with his hand covered in ice. I formed an X with my hands and made a shield of water. He froze it and then shattered it. I told him I had expected a full effort and did not want to be underestimated, reminding him that we had endured similar training. He advised me to be more aware of my surroundings, then threw ice at me. I burned the ice with my fire, but once I stopped, I realized my fire was running out of time and the water on the floor had started to evaporate, leaving me with only my air quirk. I tried to reach for my lighter on my leg, but Todoroki noticed and managed to take it and throw it to the other side of the room. If Kaminari hadn't been knocked out, I would have had a spare, but he had been rendered unconscious. With my quirk options dwindling, Todoroki and I switched to hand-to-hand combat. Every hit hurt because I was used to his style, and when I turned to the side to dodge, he struck my ribs in the side, which forced me to lower my head. I expelled air from my feet, flew toward him as fast as I could, and landed a rolling kick to his ribs that made him fall back. All Might announced through the earpiece that he was calling it a draw. Later, after the exercises, everyone changed back into their uniforms and began preparing to leave. The girls talked about their matches while we packed up. Yaoyorozu said her fight had gone well but that she had felt uncomfortable because of another student's behavior. She was grateful that Aizawa had kept things under control. When we were heading back to the classroom to get our things, someone called out to me. A yellow flash Kaminari zoomed up and accidentally knocked both of us over as he returned my lighter. He got up and handed it back. I thanked him. He said he had forgotten to return it earlier. We sat on the hallway floor. I took a moment to notice him. He had some muscle but not as much as Bakugo, his hands were larger than mine, and his hair defied gravity. The light from the windows made his eyes shine. When I reached for the lighter, our hands briefly brushed and I felt a small, warm moment of awkwardness. Kaminari waved a hand in front of my face to get my attention and teased me about staring. I denied it. Wyan asked what he had been saying. She apologized to Kaminari and explained that she was already going out with Mina, glancing at her watch and noting that Mina was already waiting. She told him they could go out. Another day. Kaminari shrugged and said it was no problem. They could do it another day. Yn said goodbye and began to walk away. Kaminari smirked and complimented her lighter. Yn looked at the black lighter with little lightning bolts drawn on it, smiled at Kaminari, and ran off with a warm flush on her cheeks. Kaminari wondered if she had really been blushing or if he had imagined it after hitting his head in training. She had looked so cute in the sunlight that he felt like he had caught a glimpse of an angel. On the bright side, she had agreed to hang out another day, which he took as a good sign. Kirishima approached with Shiro and asked what was wrong with Kaminari's face. Shiro suggested that Kaminari had hit his head too hard during training. Kirishima then asked if the person who had run off earlier had been Ln, and when Kaminari nodded, Kirishima wrapped an arm around him and teased that he probably had a crush on Ln. Later, Yn met Mina at a coffee shop. Mina asked what Yn was going to order. Yn decided on a milkshake and some cheesecake and asked Mina what she wanted. Mina chose a strawberry lemonade and chocolate cake, and the waitress took their order. The cafe Mina had chosen felt like an American diner with colorful lights and neon signs. They sat at a table by the window, across from each other, with their school bags at their sides so there was more room on the bench. Mina asked if Yn had ever been to a place like that before. Yn shook her head, and Mina laughed in disbelief. Yn explained that her father had not been a fan of diner food, so she had only seen places like this on TV and in movies. This was the first year her father had been letting her go out with friends, and she realized she had never physically gone to a fast food restaurant before. Mina wondered how Yn knew what to order. Yn said that growing up, someone would ask her and her brother what they wanted from a fast food chain and someone else would pick it up for them. Her father believed they should be grateful to have someone bring them food while they trained. Mina joked about the privilege, and they both laughed. Mina admitted she thought Yin's father might be a bit strict about training, and Yin admitted he was strict but only because he wanted her to become a successful hero. Mina asked if Yin's mother had also been a hero. Yin said that her mother had died when she was 6. Mina immediately stopped smiling, reached out, and apologized. Yin reassured her that she was not uncomfortable and that talking about her mother helped her remember her better. She explained that her mother had been a hero who ran an agency with Yin's father. Her mother had attended UA and her father had gone to Shiketsu. They had met during an exam in their second year and had only started dating in their final year of high school. Mina reacted that it sounded like a high school love story and called it sweet, which made Yin laugh. They received their food, and when Mina ordered some fries for them to share, she began talking about her life before UA. Mina mentioned that she already knew Kirishima, that she had an older brother studying medicine in his first year of college, and a younger brother who was 4 and had just developed his quirk. Mina added that she thought her little brother had been an accident, joking that she couldn't imagine wanting another baby after so many years, though she loved his energy. They both laughed until tears came from laughing so much. Their conversation stopped when they heard someone knocking on the other side of the window. They looked out and saw two familiar boys, one with electricity-like hair and one with spiky hair, smiling and waving. The two boys hurried inside and sat down next to them. Kirishima sat beside Mina and Kaminari on YN's side of the booth. Kaminari greeted them cheerfully and reached to drape an arm over YN's shoulders. YN gently declined. They talked and laughed while drinking milkshakes until Kaminari's phone rang. Kaminari looked at the screen and said his mother was calling. As he spoke with her, he let out a small, exasperated groan. Mina teased him, and YN leaned over the table and told him to say hello to his mom for her. When he hung up, he shot them a sharp look that made them laugh. Then he sighed and relayed that his mother was warning him it was getting late. They all glanced out the window and saw that the sky had already darkened. Kirishima stood and asked Mina if she was coming with them. Mina quickly explained that her house was just across the street from Kirishima's. Kirishima added that his romantic interests were with men, and Mina nodded before both of them left. YN and Kaminari exchanged stunned looks and quietly asked whether Kirishima was gay. Kaminari pledged to defend Kirishima if anyone disrespected him, and YN agreed. After the initial surprise passed, they stood and walked to the front of the diner. YN rummaged through her bag and realized she had forgotten her house keys. Her phone was dead, and she asked Kaminari if he could charge it long enough for her to make a call. Kaminari explained that Recovery Girl had told him he should avoid using his quirk after he overexerted himself and hit his head during training, so he couldn't help by charging the phone that way. He asked if she had anyone at home who could open the door. YN said her household staff were home, but she didn't know their numbers. Kaminari offered that he lived about 5 minutes away and YN could stay there to charge her phone until someone could pick her up. YN hesitated internally at the idea of going to his house alone but decided it would be quick and agreed. They started walking toward his house. YN began to shiver because she had left her school blazer behind and was only wearing a shirt. Kaminari noticed and asked if she was cold. When she tried to insist she was fine, he took a sweatshirt from his bag and urged her to put it on before she got sick. YN accepted the oversized black hoodie with small lightning bolt accents. The sleeves extended past her hands, but it helped warm her up. They reached Kaminari's 2-story white house with a small garden and backyard. Kaminari led them through the driveway and opened the door. He announced that he was back as they took off their shoes and slipped into slippers. YN heard quick little footsteps approaching. A small blur of blonde hair and energy barreled into Kaminari's arms. His little sister, Connie, had rushed over and hugged him tightly. When she noticed YN standing there, she dropped. Her brother ran over and hugged YN's legs excitedly, proclaiming that Denki had brought a girl and asking if YN was his girlfriend. YN placed a hand gently on the girl's head and introduced herself as YN Nakamura, explaining that she was in the same class as Denki. Kaminari laughed and reminded his sister to be careful. Their mother appeared, smiling and introducing herself as Riko Kaminari. She welcomed YN inside, asked Connie to let go so she could walk, and led them into the home. The entry opened to a staircase leading upstairs on the left, while the living room flowed into the dining area and kitchen on the right. The house had white walls hung with paintings. The narrator told Denki that they had not been told he had a girlfriend, and both of them stopped and began to blush. They both stuttered, trying to explain until Denki cleared his throat and explained that they were not dating and that she was just a friend from class. The narrator mentally thanked him for saying that while struggling to compose themselves. Denki's mother said she already knew and asked how Denki had convinced the narrator to come with him. The narrator explained that they had forgotten house keys and that their phone had died, and that Denki had offered to let them charge it at his house and call someone to pick them up. Denki pointed out that he could have zapped the phone to at least 5%, and Denki explained that he had short-circuited on the train that day and Recovery Girl had told him he could not use his quirk for the rest of the day. Denki's mother invited the narrator to stay for dinner and then call someone, and the narrator showed surprise. The narrator tried to decline and said they would be quick, only wanting to charge the phone. Denki's mother insisted they were not bothering, said she had made burgers, and suggested asking Denki how good they were. Denki nodded excitedly, and the narrator accepted the invitation. Denki's mother told them they could go upstairs and that she would send Connie up when dinner was ready. Denki grabbed the narrator's hand and hurried up the stairs. The upstairs looked much like the downstairs, with white walls and paintings, wooden floors, and a large dark red carpet running down the hallway. Denki's room was at the end of the hall. Inside, the narrator found an explosion of items, mostly band posters and pictures. Denki excitedly announced that this was his room, which made the narrator laugh and nod. Scanning the room, the narrator's eyes landed on a beautiful guitar. The narrator asked Denki to pinch them if they were dreaming and then realized he owned a Gibson ES. The guitar was white with black accents that Denki had customized with painted lightning bolts. Denki explained that his father had bought it for him 2 years ago and that he had painted the lightning bolts to make it feel more like him. The narrator mentioned always wanting one but said their own father refused, arguing that they already had too many music items that might distract them from their goals. The narrator noted surprise to learn Denki played. Denki admitted that his mother had made him learn guitar when he was younger, and that he had enjoyed it enough to continue. He said he no longer took lessons but still knew how to play and offered to play a little. The narrator nodded and sat on his bed, and Denki picked up the guitar and chose a song. He played Silhouette by Kanabun. The narrator loved the song and began to sing the pre-chorus. Denki joined in. The narrator jumped from the bed, grabbed the TV remote, and kept singing. They sang, danced, and laughed together, caught up in the moment and forgetting everything else. For those minutes, it felt as if only the two of them existed in a world without villains or pressure. When the song ended, they locked eyes, and the narrator was captivated by the flash of lightning in Denki's golden eyes, feeling a trance-like wonder through their own eyes. They both fell back on the bed and laughed. The narrator teased that Denki could actually play, and Denki responded with a playful eye roll. The narrator sat on the edge of the bed, realized the phone still wasn't charging, and found a charger on the bedside table. The narrator announced that the phone was charging. Denki sat and offered the guitar to the narrator, saying it was their turn to play since they had wanted one so badly. The narrator held the guitar, admiring it and feeling a strong desire to have one for themselves. Denki waited patiently for the narrator to start playing. 2 days later, a classmate remarked that they had not known each other long and yet everyone already seemed to know that his personality was terrible. Another student retorted sharply, criticizing the first student's choice of words. Someone shouted a threat, and that was how YN woke up in the middle of the bus to a commotion that sounded like an attempted confrontation. Mina told YN they were almost at the facility and urged her to wake before Aizawa arrived. YN wiped drool from the corner of her mouth and sat up beside Mina. Mina remarked that YN looked peaceful while sleeping, explaining that YN usually had a serious expression and dark circles that made her seem cold to others. YN asked what Mina meant, and Mina laughed quickly, trying to soften her words. YN warned Mina playfully that she would get her back, letting a shadow from her bangs fall over her face while a chill seemed to flutter Mina's hair and jacket. Mina began to apologize, but YN interrupted, admitting she had been joking and only wanted to see Mina's reaction. Mina's eyes flashed in YN's direction. Mina then reminded YN that she still had to explain what happened after she had left with Kirishima and Kaminari. YN felt heat rush to her cheeks and looked away from Mina toward Kaminari, who returned a smirking wink that made YN blush. Mina teased that YN had a crush, causing everyone on the bus to turn and look. Kirishima shouted for details, leaning forward to stir up more chaos. Mina started to answer, but YN quickly covered her mouth and poured some water into her to stop her teasing. YN told the others that Mina had been joking as she checked that Mina was all right while Mina coughed. Mina warned YN never to do that again, then insisted that YN still needed to tell the story about Kaminari's house. YN agreed to share it after the current matter was finished. Denki wondered what Mina had been talking about and became determined to find out who YN's supposed crush might be. He resolved privately to learn the truth and to make sure YN did not slip away from him. Later, Denki remembered a conversation with his mother. She had called him from the kitchen and asked for help with the dishes, then told him she had been speaking with YN before she left and thought YN was a very kind girl. She observed to Denki that he looked at YN differently from the other girls he knew and suggested he should make sure YN knew she could always count on him. Denki interpreted this to mean he should be there for her rather than trying to control her, and his mother stopped short when he asked whether she had known YN's mother. She admitted she had been very close to YN's mother and then left him to think about it. Denki later searched online and found an article about a national funeral for a hero. The younger daughter had not attended the ceremony, the article explained, because doctors had advised against it after she had witnessed her mother being killed by a villain. She was said to be staying in her room with no visitors allowed. Denki felt haunted by the thought of what YN might have gone through at such a young age. He looked at the guitar in the corner of the room and remembered how happy she had seemed earlier that day. He resolved to follow his mother's advice and always be there for her when she was ready to talk. Denki admitted to himself that YN was a mystery, but he planned to wait patiently until she chose to share her story. Later, the class gathered in front of 13 and Aizawa. YN sat between Denki and Mina and was only half listening when the lights suddenly went out, plunging everyone into unease. YN noticed a disturbance near the water fountain and moved toward it. Kaminari called after her, asking where she was going, but she kept moving to investigate. A short pause bridged the moment as everyone reacted. YN was right at the steps, starting to make her way down, when a purple fog rolled in and villains emerged from it. Aizawa stepped forward, pushed her back, and ordered 13 to protect the students. Denki grabbed YN from behind, lifted her, and urged her to stay with the group, his calm words helping her steady herself. The fog-formed figure blocked the exit. Kurojirai addressed them in a cold, drifting voice, telling everyone not to run and identifying himself as Kurojirai of the League of Villains. Kirishima and Bakugo immediately launched at him, but the fog moved to protect its source. YN shouted at Kurojirai, demanding to know what they were doing there. Kurojirai announced that they had come for the symbol of peace, all might. The students froze in shock. Kirishima and Bakugo pressed their attack but were held back by the fog. Someone tried to speak, but the words were swallowed by the spreading mist. Denki gripped YN's hand and began to pull her toward the stairs. They ran together, hand in hand, until YN stopped dead as they reached the top. Denki yelled something in warning, but it dissolved into the chaos. YN's eyes locked on a man with blue hair and a hand over his face, and then landed on the person who had haunted her nightmares since that fateful night, the man who had caused her most painful memories. The man recognized her instantly and gave a slow, cruel grin. Denki tried to move her, but she stood frozen, tears tracking down her cheeks. Denki cupped her face with warm hands and pleaded with her to move, begging her to be safe. YN whispered the names Denki and Danzo, voice barely steady as she identified the man who had killed her mother and left her with 2 scars. Denki glanced at Danzo, then back at YN, alarm widening his eyes as the purple fog surged toward them. Denki shoved YN against his chest and held her tightly as the fog wrapped around them. YN's frantic thought was that someone in the facility was about to face a terrible reckoning. When she opened her eyes, smoke still hung in the air and Denki's bright hair was right in front of her. She registered the heat rising to her cheeks from the close contact and admonished herself to focus. Denki asked if she was okay. She nodded and eased away from his embrace. Momo and Jiraiya were nearby as well, ready to help themselves out of the mess. YN's resolve hardened. She needed to find Danzo and confront him to avenge her mother. That determination snapped into sharp focus as more villains closed around them. One of the villains taunted them about finding YN. Another announced that Master Danzo would be pleased they had captured her. Jiraiya demanded to know what they were talking about, drawing their attention. The villains glanced at Jiraiya before turning back to YN. YN stepped forward and asked, quietly but clearly, whether Danzo had been searching for her. The villains confirmed that he had, holding up a picture and remarking that YN resembled her mother. The mention of her mother tightened YN's fists. Denki, Momo, and Jiraiya looked on, puzzled and concerned. YN told them not to be overconfident and declared that she would be the one to reach Danzo, while they would end up out of the fight. The words carried a hard edge of promise. Denki watched as a sudden surge of power radiated from YN. The floor around her cracked as wind spiraled, lifting debris, and the villains stared, taken aback by the display. YN reached for her lighter, her movements calm and focused in a way that unsettled those watching. She told Denki, Momo, and Jiraiya to fall back as she prepared to handle most of the attackers and entrusted the rest to them. Air, earth, and fire swirled around her and coalesced above her, the elements combining into a single, blazing force as she prepared to strike. It took her 3 seconds to create a massive ball of the 3 elements, which she passed into her hand. She tossed it upward, leapt from the floor, and propelled it toward the villains. Just before it reached them, it stopped. Only YN uttered the single word boom before a huge explosion erupted. When the smoke cleared, YN was nowhere to be seen and most of the villains lay motionless on the ground. Momo shouted that it was their turn now. YN ran toward the center of USJ where she expected Danzo to be. Doubt chased her. Had she made the right choice in leaving the others? What if they could not handle the villains? What if more enemies attacked them? She forced herself forward, telling herself there was no turning back and that she had to stop Danzo. She hid behind a rock to formulate a plan and locate him. She spotted Danzo in a corner, watching. Her search froze when she saw Aizawa on the ground, injured. Panic surged through her. She could not let Aizawa be hurt. She dashed from cover toward him and intercepted the blue-haired assailant, striking him and sending him flying to release Aizawa. She helped Aizawa to his feet, and he asked what she was doing. She replied that she was saving him. They moved to the stairs, and she released him to face Danzo as he approached. Shigaraki shouted at her in contempt, but Danzo told him that this one was his. Danzo's voice unlocked old memories. Her mother, smoke, the hospital, the nightmares. She froze. Danzo taunted whether YN Nakamura was afraid and then escalated to call her the daughter of the deceased hero. His words struck her deeply. Pain flared in her hands as she clenched them. Danzo added that it had not been his quirk that killed her mother. The accusation broke something in her. Her voice cracked and tears streamed down her cheeks. Danzo only mocked her further, asking if she was upset by the truth. Rage built inside her like a furnace. She let it fuel her power. Flames began to rise around YN's feet and swirled up around her. She screamed for him to stop and charged, unleashing bursts of fire from her fists and mouth while attempting to strike him. Danzo defended himself with his own quirk. YN pulled back to catch her breath. Danzo taunted her for tiring quickly, and her fire momentarily subsided. Then she steadied herself, her movements becoming cleaner, more precise. She was gaining control of her anger. Momo, Jiraiya, and Denki arrived and saw YN locked in combat with Danzo while Aizawa lay on the stairs. Momo knelt to check on Aizawa and asked what was happening. YN warned that she was risking everything, and Aizawa acknowledged the danger. At that moment, YN was struck repeatedly and fell hard to the ground. More classmates filtered into the center of USJ, some injured and some not, but all were shocked by YN's cries. Danzo seized YN and lifted her by the neck, holding her aloft. She was battered and dazed. He sneered as he looked over her, suggesting he expected scars from their earlier encounter and implying the bandages hid them. YN realized he intended to expose her. He tore the bandages away, revealing her injuries to everyone. He mocked her as weak and said she could not protect herself or those she cared about. Despite the pain, YN found a small, fierce smile. She told him she would never prove her strength by fighting someone 1/3 her age, then muttered the word boom. A sudden explosion erupted beneath Danzo's feet and the impact sent them both flying in opposite directions. YN locked eyes with Denki and saw tears in his face. He had noticed what she had set under Danzo and tried to warn her not to use it again. He understood the cost. She knew she would be out of consciousness in seconds, but she also knew it was the only way to free herself from his grip without endangering others. With that thought, everything went black. YN POV. She knew she had messed up. It was the kind of mistake that happened too often, but this one felt worse. She had not intended to sacrifice herself just to avoid being killed, but that instinct for self-preservation had fought against the fear of losing someone who mattered. The image of everyone staring at her while she was held by the person who had haunted her life would not leave her. Denki's golden eyes, filled with pain, stood out most of all. Even in that terrible moment she could read him like an open book. His gaze pleaded for her not to destroy herself, but she knew that if she did not act someone else would step in and get hurt trying to protect her. She refused to let that happen again. She was almost certain Danzo had gotten out of USJ, injured or not. How else could she still be alive? She had likely been unconscious for a while, and she forced herself to wake because she still had to deal with the police. The thought of delaying that was tempting. A voice taunted her and she recognized it immediately as Danzo. He told her she was weak, echoed insults about her mother, and urged her to give in. Footsteps approached from behind. Her impulse was to turn toward him. She spoke his name with contempt and told him he should be the one 6 feet under, not her mother. Danzo's words invited the most toxic thoughts, and she felt her composure wobble. Danzo mocked her chances in the game he had created and laughed at the idea she could ever defeat him. YN spat that she was not playing his game and tried to stand firm, though his presence was a casual, constant threat. He closed the distance, and in a whisper beside her ear he told her that she had become the most important pawn the moment her mother died in front of her. He said the sight of that had frozen her during the attack, and his words pushed her into rage. She shoved him away and vowed she would never be his pawn and would kill him with her own hands. When she tried to strike him, part of him dispersed like fog, as if he were a creation of her own mind. Danzo insisted she could not hit something born of her imagination. He accused her of being overly emotional, the same trait he blamed for her mother's death, and claimed that emotion would make her lose his game. He said she lacked the will to kill him even after years of training, and that the only way to win would be for both of them to fall. YN asked if that meant both would have to go down. Danzo confirmed and argued that she cared too much about herself and the people around her to ever sacrifice herself. He suggested she might have to choose between her life and letting her friends get hurt, saying it would be better for her to die hated than to watch them lifeless. At the sound of those words, a vision flooded her, motionless bodies on the ground. She rushed to them and cradled her brother, who lay unresponsive. She refused to accept it and called out to Kakashi, gripping the motionless figures as she looked for life where there was none. Her hands closed on Kaminari, his bright yellow hair familiar even in that state. He was unresponsive and pale. There were no signs of recovery. Danzo tried to tell her he had not directly harmed them, that her love for them was what had doomed them. Anger took over and she felt a surge of power. Flames erupted around her in a blur of emotion and energy. Danzo vanished, and in the chaos everything went dark while his words echoed in her mind. Her love for them had caused their fate. Kakashi POV. YN had been unconscious for 2 days, and Kakashi had stayed with her in the hospital the whole time. Some of her friends were present in the building, but only Kakashi, his father, and a few police officers were allowed inside her room. The others waited in the adjacent area. Suddenly, YN opened her eyes and sat up despite her weakness. She told Kakashi to fetch the doctor. As soon as their father began to speak, Kakashi dashed out of the room to get help, his classmates watching him run with confused expressions. I quickly found the doctor and told him that YN had woken up, and he ran to her room. A girl with pink hair burst into the corridor, followed by several classmates and Shoto. The pink-haired girl called urgently for Kakashi and asked, worried, whether YN was all right and whether the doctor had been sent. Kakashi assured them that YN was probably fine, that she had just regained consciousness and the doctor needed to examine her first. The yellow-haired boy, Kaminari, asked if they could see her now. Kakashi explained that not yet. YN needed to be checked and to speak with the police, and that could take a while. He offered to arrange rides home since it was unsafe to walk alone after the incident. Kaminari said he would wait for YN and talk with her, and the others agreed to wait as well. I sat in the grass by my mother's grave and stared at the stone in front of me. I had been released from the hospital the day before, and coming here felt like the only thing that might help. I missed my mother. She had always worn that caring smile even when I messed up. She would get upset at me sometimes, but she always made sure I knew she would help me through whatever happened. I needed her now more than ever, especially after what had happened at the hospital. Flashback. In the hospital room, The doctor explained that the bruises from the fight and my quirk were not unusual and would heal without complications. My father nodded as the doctor spoke. My brother, anxious, asked whether I could train with him. The doctor advised that it would be best if I skipped practice that weekend to avoid further injury, though he said that if my brother insisted on training with me, he should be careful. Everyone agreed. The doctor then cautioned that past medical reports showed accidents like mine could affect my psychological state. I reacted defensively and crossed my arms. I insisted that would not happen. The doctor urged us to watch for signs of anxiety or stress and to tell someone if I started feeling worse, reminding us that mental health is as important as physical health. He said he would check on other patients and that if everything went smoothly I could go home that day. We thanked him and he left, leaving me with my brother and my dad. My father sat on the bed beside me and said he was glad I was okay but insisted that next time I should let the professional heroes handle things. He told me he understood my drive and my path toward becoming someone great, but he worried about what could have gone wrong and how badly I might have been hurt. I told him I would try to be more careful and that I hoped there would not be a next time. Inwardly, I wanted another chance but only when I was stronger. I wanted to confront Danzo and get answers. My dad surprised me by pulling me into a hug, something he did rarely. I let myself relax into him. My brother joked that the older kids always got left out, and my dad teased him back, promising to buy another video game if necessary. They laughed as they hugged and I complained that I was being squished until they let go. My dad explained he had to leave for work. Some urgent matters in the United States had called him away for 2 weeks. I told him to make sure the job paid well so we could have a big dinner when he returned. He said his goodbyes and left, leaving me alone with Kakashi for a moment. Kakashi told me that some people were waiting to see me. When I asked who, he left to fetch them. I wondered who would come to visit. The door burst open and the pink-haired girl threw herself at me in a flurry of animated concern. She expressed how relieved she was that I was okay, recalling that she had been terrified after hearing how I had been thrown into the air during the incident. She chattered energetically until Kakashi gently disentangled us. The pink-haired girl embraced me again, softer this time, and then reminded me that I needed to breathe when talking or I would pass out. Her worry settled into a warm relief as more classmates gathered around us. I felt overwhelmed but grateful for their support. When they pulled away, I saw who else was there: Kirishima, Shiro, Denki, and Bakugo. Shiro protested that Bakugo had made him come along. YN noted with a smirk that Bakugo actually seemed to care about her well-being. Kirishima intervened before Katsuki could get angrier and said that they were all glad she was okay, but that visitor hours were ending so they had to leave. He scratched the back of his head and looked down, looking soft and fluffy. YN told them it was fine and thanked them for stopping by. The group turned to say goodbye, and soon YN was alone with Denki. YN started to speak quietly, but Denki immediately wrapped her in a quick, warm hug. Denki scolded her gently for jumping in front of one of Japan's most wanted criminals and asked if she had been crazy. YN replied that she liked adrenaline, and Denki rolled his eyes playfully before pulling her in again. YN rested briefly against him while he muttered that she should never do anything like that again because it was dangerous. At the same time, a sudden, terrible image flashed through her mind. In a moment of panic, she imagined her friends being swept away by her own white flames, an overwhelming, anime-style surge of power that left her shaken. The vision snapped her awake to the fear of what might happen if she let anyone in too deeply. A little later, YN stammered that she had been distracted and had not seen the car coming. She was nearly hyperventilating with confusion about what had just happened. Denki held her in warm arms and reassured her that it was okay. He told her she could still listen to music while walking but not so loudly that she couldn't hear traffic. He pushed her back gently by the shoulders, looking unusually serious as he asked where she was headed. YN said she was heading home and pointed in the direction of her house. Denki offered to walk her, and YN first insisted he didn't have to, promising she would be more careful. Denki teased that he had thought they both enjoyed each other's company. He made a dramatic, playful face about being left alone and then pretended to be wounded that his friends did not want to hang out with him. YN stepped closer, stood on tiptoe, and gave him a small smile. Denki exclaimed in mock pain when she flicked his forehead, then quickly ran to catch up. He slipped his arm around her shoulders and eased a little closer. Denki complained that she had been annoying and asked what she expected him to do, to which he answered that, yes, he wanted a hug. YN rolled her eyes at his dramatic answer, and they continued walking in a comfortable silence. The walk felt easy, sun shining, warm air, and Denki's arm around her. YN's heart beat faster at the closeness, and she worried he might notice. Denki suddenly declared how much he loved the day, lifting his face to the sunlight and smiling so brightly that YN couldn't help but smile back. He said he felt like sleeping and binge watching something, and his gold eyes caught hers, making her feel fluttery. YN reminded him that practice was important if they wanted to become pros and help people. They needed to train consistently. Denki acknowledged the point and said they all needed rest sometimes too. He turned toward her, softened his expression, and held her hands. Denki told her he admired how selfless she could be. He had seen it during the incident at USJ and that she deserved to think of herself sometimes and rest too. He asked her not to always carry everyone else's burdens. YN found his words convincing, though a worry lingered that being selfish might put others at risk. Denki pleaded for her to take care of herself as well. YN allowed herself to consider that maybe letting go of some of the pressure would be okay and that she could try being a little more selfish at times. She smiled and Denki's grin was bright in return. Mina messaged excitedly, saying she had news and asking YN to come over, offering to get any food YN wanted because her father had left his card. YN replied that she would come and Mina said she would have someone pick her up in 10 minutes. When they met, Mina threw a question at YN about Kaminari. YN choked on her food at the sudden topic and demanded to know what Mina meant. Mina teased that they were always lovey-dovey and reminded YN that YN had told her they had met up. YN narrowed her eyes and insisted that talking together did not mean Kaminari had a crush. Mina laughed and called YN out for being dense, then suggested they watch a movie. YN browsed the catalog and, feeling unexpectedly emotional, picked The Lion King. Mina brightened and declared that they would sing along, which made YN laugh as she started the film. During the movie, the group chat lit up. Friends teased about missing the movie night, joked about nicknames, and ripped each other over Bakugo and Kaminari. Bakugo yelled a complaint into the chat, and others typed playful responses. One friend teased about claiming Kaminari's attention, and the group laughed it off. The banter was loud and affectionate but harmless. After Mufasa's death on screen, YN cried, and Mina ribbed her for being sensitive. Friends in the chat reacted with sympathy and mock solemnity. The moment passed, the movie ended and the sleepover continued. Later, YN lay on her bed thinking about the sports festival and the fourth-place finish. She worried about how her father would react but took comfort in the fact that the festival had shown how capable her quirk could be. While she waited for the dreaded call from her father, her phone filled with messages from Denki. He messaged repeatedly, calling her affectionate names, saying he missed her, and asking her to come over to hang out. YN's heart skipped at the attention and she texted Mina for help but found herself already in a conversation with Denki. She admitted she had been finishing something and said she could not go that day because her father was upset about the festival. Denki joked about dealing with her dad and asked her not to make him wait too long. She ultimately told him she would come over and asked for 15 minutes, and he replied that a sleepover sounded perfect. A brief note explained that YN had changed her mind and would be coming over, and the story moved on. When YN arrived at Denki's place, Bakugo asked about her weekend and whether she had rested after the sports festival. YN stayed quiet, as Bakugo's loud voice filled the room. Denki lay on his back on his bed while YN sat at his computer, playing an online match against Bakugo and Zero. Kirishima had been on YN's team until Bakugo dominated the game in his explosive, over-the-top style. The room buzzed with the familiar energy of friends playing and teasing, and for a little while, the recent worries faded into the background. Now it was YN versus Bakugo and neither of them was willing to lose. Even Denki got up from his seat and moved behind YN's chair to get a better view of the match. He rested his arms on the back of the chair and watched the game. Small curses escaped YN each time she failed to dodge an attack from Bakugo. YN told Denki that he was breathing down her neck and to stop. Denki took a quick step back and crossed his arms, insisting that he was not too close. YN returned to playing and Denki moved back behind the chair, trying not to put his head too close. The game continued for a few more minutes. Denki zoned out until he heard YN hit her head on the desk. He rushed to her side and put his hand between her head and the desk to prevent another bump, and YN accidentally hit her head on his hand. Denki pulled his hand away and quickly said that it hurt, then reassured YN that she was okay. Everyone groaned at Ciro's earlier comment, and YN said that it was all an illusion and that she was not even there, which shut the topic down. When everyone logged off and left the game, YN found herself alone with Denki. He stood in front of her when she turned her chair around, arms crossed and an annoyed expression on his face. YN asked what he wanted to do, pretending not to notice his irritation about being ignored for the last 30 minutes. Denki pointed out that he had wanted to hang out with her alone, that she had ignored him to play with others, and that she hadn't let him play at all. His hands went to his hips. YN couldn't help but smile at his outburst. YN teased that he was giving off green vibes, and Denki, confused, reminded her that his hair was yellow and that she should get her eyes checked. YN waved it off, apologized for ignoring him, and explained that she had needed to blow off some steam. Then smiled widely, took her hand, and led her to his bed. His room was dim except for lights behind the bed. YN sat with her back against the wall and her legs stretched out. Denki lay down and rested his head on her lap. Denki asked if they should watch Crash Landing on You, and YN agreed immediately. They had been watching the drama together and were already on the last episode. As the episode played, YN's fingers found Denki's hair and she wrapped a few strands around her fingers. They sat like that until the episode ended, both visibly moved. Denki sniffled and said that someday he was going to die from dehydration because of dramas. YN reminded him that she had told him to get a drink. He got up and then sat beside her, both leaning against the wall, content in each other's quiet company. When YN's phone began to buzz incessantly, Denki held it up and asked if she could at least tell her dad where she was. YN explained that her father had started calling after a fight before she came over, and she was not in the mood to talk to him because of things he had said that crossed a line. Denki suggested she ignore the messages, and then looked at the incoming notifications himself. The messages from YN's father were clearly not apologetic, and Denki expressed shock at the way her father had been speaking to her. He noted that a father should not talk to his daughter in a manipulative or aggressive way. Though Denki knew the man publicly as the number 3 hero, the tone of the messages did not match the proud public image. It hurt Denki to see how bluntly her father dismissed and criticized her. YN downplayed it as if it were normal and said she would go home later and try to get to her room without being noticed. Denki felt concerned and wanted to help, quietly thinking that YN deserved better than the harsh words she had received. Denki warned her firmly that she was definitely not doing that, his tone suddenly serious. She blinked in confusion. He explained that her father was out of his mind right now and that whatever had happened was genuinely frightening, pointing at her phone as he spoke. He told her to text her brother or someone else to bring her things because they were having a sleepover. She asked if he was serious, still unconvinced. He confirmed that it was a sleepover and urged her to ask someone to bring her stuff, clearly proud of the idea. She texted her brother to bring her things. He took some time to agree. When she looked up from her phone, her eyes met Denki's, which were bright and excited about the sleepover. YN and Denki were in his bathroom, rummaging through a drawer filled with skincare. YN noted that he had more face masks than she'd ever seen and grabbed a pink sheet mask. Denki's drawer was packed and surprisingly organized by purpose and color. Denki selected 2 masks and handed one to YN, choosing the same baby pink one he planned to use. The mask carried a scent she liked, and YN quietly appreciated that he had remembered her preference. Denki had already applied his mask while YN inspected hers. He then turned her toward him, took the sheet mask from her hand, and smoothed it onto her face. The sudden cool against her skin hid the faint flush on her cheeks as he focused on fitting the mask properly. Denki read the back of the package and noted that they just needed to wait 15 minutes. The time passed quickly as they chatted and joked about things from their class. YN leaned on the sink counter while Denki stood in front of her, and they laughed until their sides hurt. YN made an offhand comment about how touching Hagakure in her hero suit sounded like a disaster, and both of them laughed harder at the absurd image. Denki wiped a small tear from laughing and suggested they remove their masks. Facing the mirror, YN teased that if Denki applied the same attention to school that he did to skincare, he would rank higher than Bakugo. Denki responded that he was smart. He had passed UA's written entrance exam, but he was unlucky to be surrounded by exceptionally talented classmates. He then removed YN's mask and disposed of both in the bin. They stood looking at one another, the air thick with quiet tension. YN felt a flutter from his steady gaze and tried to hold her composure, reminding herself of Mina's advice about confidence. Before she could break eye contact, Denki did his cheeks, betraying the butterflies he couldn't hide. His eyes drifted to the faded tips of YN's split-dyed hair. Denki then suggested they dye their hair together. YN turned toward the mirror to inspect how faded the color had become, and Denki rested his arms on her shoulders from behind, fingers interlacing as he tilted his head with a small smile. The closeness made her heart race. He proposed hot pink, excited at the idea of matching colors. YN hesitated, explaining that her father had been adamantly opposed to bright pink when she first wanted to dye her hair and had been the reason she had to wait months to get her current style. Denki's face softened as he realized why she looked downcast. He told her not to let her father's disapproval define her choices and encouraged her to go for the color she wanted if that was what made her happy. YN giggled at his earnestness, the tension easing into a shared, hopeful moment. Denki remarked that his opinion on hair was too loud for someone who barely had any. YN laughed outright, lightly slapping his arm but keeping hold of it, and she smiled confidently as she said he was right and that it would make her father mad. He deserved to be mad after acting like such a JRK. Denki grinned, hugged YN, and started toward his room, leaving her stunned, eye twitching and hands frozen as she tried to process what he had said. YN took a deep breath and warned that she would have a heart attack if her father did not pay attention to what he had said. Denki, already in his room, picked up both phones and handed one back to YN along with one of his black jackets. YN checked her phone and widened in disbelief at the notification. She covered her mouth and laughed, and Denki turned to ask what was wrong. YN explained that her brother had sent a message saying their father had caught a plane to some unknown place. She glanced at the ceiling where a colorful toy worm hung on a string and let out a small, frustrated grunt. Denki was speechless. YN continued that her father always did this when an argument made him realize he was wrong and that not even Kakashi, the senior, knew where he had flown off to. Denki replied in a dreamy tone that Kakashi, the senior, really was amazing, which made YN's face register both disgust and confusion. YN decided they should go by hair dye and declared that after this stunt she was not just dyeing the tips but going full-on hot pink. The two went downstairs. YN bent to put on her shoes while Denki twirled the car keys on his finger. Denki's mother leaned against the doorframe with her arms crossed, checked her watch, and asked where they were going at 11 o'clock. She was usually relaxed about YN being over and often encouraged Denki to invite her, but she would naturally question them if they were leaving so late, especially if they were taking the car. Denki reassured her that they were only going to buy pink hair dye and asked if she wanted anything. She said she wanted some chocolate, warned them to be careful and not take too long, and reminded them not to talk to strangers. She waved and they left. YN hesitated and asked if it was a good idea for Denki to drive and where he had learned. Denki said his mother had taught him all summer, patted her shoulder, and opened the car door for her. He ran to the other side, started the engine, connected his phone to the speakers, and announced that they were going to annoy her father. They sang loudly along to Twice on the Drive and soon arrived at the small store. YN teased Denki that he looked like someone whose favorite Twice song was What Is Love, and Denki admitted that he knew it was a bop. They walked together toward the store entrance. The two friends picked out the dye and headed back home, still laughing about the night's plan. Denki looked through the hair dyes and mentioned that Euphoria was an amazing show, but he would feel more comfortable if the characters were not high schoolers. YN agreed and added that Leonardo DiCaprio liking the show while often dating much younger women made her uncomfortable. YN and Denki debated which pink dye to choose, each holding a drink and a bag of chips. Their outfits matched the late-night convenience store run. Denki in loose black shorts, a large gray hoodie, and black socks with a lightning pattern. YN in her favorite sweatpants and one of Denki's black zip-up hoodies. Denki held up a box of pink dye and asked if that one was okay, and YN nodded before heading to the register to pay. When they stepped out of the store, a gust of wind passed through them, light but enough to knock YN's hoodie back and muss Denki's hair. YN grabbed a hair tie and offered it to Denki. She rolled her eyes, stepped closer, and reached up to his hair. Denki bent his knees so she could reach more easily. She tied the upper half of his hair into a small bun, a few front pieces escaping and resting loose, then stepped back and admired her handiwork. Denki thought she had made him look even better, and YN hoped the streetlights did not reveal the faint flush on her cheeks from their close proximity. She was not used to physical closeness. Her upbringing had kept that distance. To distract from her own embarrassment, she tried to throw him off balance with a confession that was more teasing than romantic. YN teased him about his mother in a light, joking way. Denki froze, then reacted with mock disgust while laughing and grabbing YN's arms to playfully push and pull until she stopped laughing. YN insisted her teasing was true, still catching her breath from laughing. Denki protested and told her not to say that again, then threw his arm around her shoulder and started walking toward his car with a small, triumphant smirk. YN, competitive by nature, did not let him have the upper hand. She reached her hand around his lower back and rested it on his waist while keeping the plastic bag of their purchases in her other hand. Denki tensed at first, which made YN smile, but he relaxed after a few steps and they continued to the car. Once at his house, they gathered their things and realized they had no plan, so they did the only thing neither of them would recommend to a well-rested person: wake Denki's mother at nearly 1 a.m., knowing she had to leave early the next morning. Denki asked and she initially refused, but when YN asked, she agreed to help. Denki's mother poured the dye into a small container, but when she began the process, Denki backed away. YN was the only one who ended up with pink hair, and it turned out well thanks to Denki's mother, who went back to bed afterward. Denki joked that Mina would likely spend Monday teasing them about being twins, and YN giggled while scrolling through her phone. It was already 3 a.m. on Sunday. YN and Denki sat on the roof after climbing up through his window. The only lights were the stars, street lamps, and the occasional passing car. The night was not cold, but they stayed close to share warmth and comfort. Denki remarked that Bakugo would probably be upset. YN responded that it would be nothing new. They both looked up at the sky. YN savored the unfamiliar feeling of freedom she had waited to experience, and she appreciated that, for the moment, the blonde boy beside her let her be away from her father's control. Denki asked if she had always wanted to become a hero. YN hesitated, then admitted that, in a way, she had. Being a hero was the only life she had known. Her father had been training her for that role since she was very young. YN believed she would never choose anything else even if she wanted to. She hated to admit it, but she did not know life outside the hero world. Her father had kept her inside that tight circle from the beginning, as if making sure she would follow his path without question. She hugged her knees to her chest and smiled at nothing, lips pressed together. Denki watched her carefully. Her longing smile revealed her thoughts like a clear lake under the sun. From a distance it reflected light and warmth, but those who drew closer could see how deep it really was. To Denki, YN was like that lake seen by everyone as a source of light, someone whose presence others craved, yet only a few were allowed to see how far that light reached. YN admitted that her father had raised her to be a miniature version of himself, expecting her to achieve goals he had failed to reach. Denki asked if that was why the things he had said earlier had been so cruel, and YN confirmed it. She explained that whenever she did not come in first, he would shatter her confidence and use harsh words with a satisfaction that hurt. No one else, she said, understood what that did to her. Denki told her that her father should not be a hero if he took pleasure in tearing his own child down. He said that a person who derived enjoyment from belittling someone close should not be put on a pedestal. YN looked up at him as he spoke, seeing both anger and gentleness in his expression. Denki was the first person to say such things to her, the first person she had shared this with beyond her own inner circle, and she took her time to absorb it. YN joked that Denki should save his inspirational speeches for when they were literally fighting for their lives, and the two of them laughed together. The conversation had grown heavy, and YN made it clear she did not want to keep dwelling on her father. Denki recognized that and steered the talk toward himself. Denki said that everyone had always told him his quirk was impressive and that he should be a hero. He confessed that while UA could be fun, the rules felt suffocating. Being a hero, he argued, ought to mean freedom, not an endless list of restrictions. YN laughed and remarked that it was ironic the people who enforced the law needed to follow it so strictly. Denki shrugged and agreed, then lay back on the roof with his arms behind his head to watch the stars. YN rolled onto her stomach and rested on her elbows, speaking about the problems she saw in hero society. She explained that people were judged from the moment their quirks appeared. Flashy, popular quirks drew praise and encouragement, while anything different or anything associated with violence was labeled dangerous and blamed on the person who bore it. The people in power, she said, rarely bothered to change the system that kept them in control, and that hypocrisy pushed others toward resentment. She referenced classmates like the boy from General Studies as examples of how the system could alienate promising people and push them toward the wrong side. Denki noticed how much YN resented the system she had been raised in. He proposed a pact. If they could not change the system from inside, they would try to change it from the outside. He suggested that if the people on top had turned heroism into an excuse for abuse, then perhaps villains could redefine what heroism meant. YN paused, surprised by the proposition but not opposed. The freedom she had always wanted felt suddenly attainable. The chance to challenge people like her father and force real change finally seemed within reach. The idea had always smoldered in her mind, and Denki's words felt like fuel that made that spark grow. Together, they could be the match that set things ablaze. YN agreed and extended her hand to seal the pact, smiling as she lay on her side. Denki returned the gesture with a grin, and they shook hands, a quiet, determined moment that bound them together in purpose. They sat back and watched the sky, a renewed resolve in their silence. Denki then shared a quieter thought about the contradictions of the hero world and how they would have to navigate them. YN listened, and for a moment their conversations softened into mutual understanding. They felt closer in intent and trust, each drawing strength from the other as the night settled around them. They spent a quiet moment close beneath the stars and then paused, both catching their breath. After a while, Denki pulled back and took a few deep breaths. When they opened their eyes, Denki focused on her eyes and found them beautiful. YN smiled mischievously and told him she wanted those who had hurt them to regret what they had done. Denki agreed that they would face it together, and they affirmed their resolve. Monday morning found only about 5 people in the classroom. Mina, Kirishima, and YN were among them. Mina and Kirishima rushed in and slammed their hands on YN's desk, snapping her out of her quiet moment. YN greeted them with a bright good morning. Mina urged her to tell them what had happened. YN insisted that although she had slept over at Kaminari's, nothing important had occurred. Kirishima pointed out YN's pink hair. Mina agreed and complimented the change, and YN returned the gesture with a wink. Kirishima pressed for the truth about whether anything had happened between YN and Kaminari over the weekend, moving closer in curiosity. YN crossed her arms, leaned back in her chair, and pet her head with a small smirk, teasing Kirishima about whether he was jealous. Mina laughed at the exchange. Bakugo stepped into the classroom and complained about the extra noise, and YN offered a casual good morning, which he ignored as he headed to his seat. Mina and YN laughed together that Bakugo speaking 10 words this early was an improvement. Bakugo snapped at the mention of pink hair, asking loudly what had been said. At that moment Denki walked in with his hands in his pockets and a lazy smile, his eyes brightening when they passed over YN. YN's smile deepened in response. A warm feeling spread through her as their eyes met. She had never felt like this about anyone before. It was not only a reaction to her sheltered childhood but something Denki had sparked in her from the start, growing stronger with each day like the heavy, charged air before a summer storm, when the clouds gather and everything seems poised on the edge of change. The sensation made her want to step outside into the rain and feel the contrast of cold on her skin against the warmth inside her. Denki's presence stirred that same restless thrill, and she knew she would not get tired of it. Storms were always something she loved. She had always been able to form storms with her quirk, but right now Wyan only wanted Denki to bring a different kind of storm into her life, one that would feel like cool rain on a hot summer day. Denki dropped his bag on his desk and walked straight to Yn's side. He greeted the girls, and both returned the greeting. Kirishima and Bakugo were talking a short distance away. Denki slipped his arm around Yn's shoulders and she leaned into his waist, nesting against him while he gently played with her newly dyed pink hair. Denki asked Mina how her weekend had been. Mina replied that nothing much had happened for her but that it had looked rather eventful for Denki and Yn, and she raised an eyebrow at their closeness and at Yn's hair. Yn, half asleep from a sleepless night, felt comfortable and relaxed in Denki's presence. Mina noticed that Denki did not comment on their display of affection but did not press the matter. She suspected something had happened between them over the weekend. She left for her seat, giving the pair a little privacy. Murmured that Denki should send a message to her brother to let him know she was already at school so he would not worry, since he had not seen her in a few days. Denki responded and reached for her phone, stroking her hair as he unlocked it with the password he already knew. He frowned when he saw an article she had been reading about her father at the airport 2 days earlier, the day they had argued. He read a line suggesting a public figure's trip to help protect the world and scoffed at the phrasing. The world that man should have been worrying about, Denki thought, was the one hugging him now. He would give everything to make her smile and let her world shine the way she wanted. He closed the article and sent the message she had requested. Her brother replied that she should meet him after first PRD about keys and extra training. Yn suggested leaving him on read so he would know they were going. Denki nodded and turned the phone off, placing it back on her desk. Denki then pulled Yn into a deeper hug. She pressed closer into his chest as he rested his chin lightly on her head and rubbed gentle circles on her back. Denki observed that she looked tired, and she sighed softly, saying she felt exhausted. Denki asked if she had been thinking about that moment on the roof, but she pinched his side to interrupt him. Denki complained that it had hurt, and Yn replied that it had been intentional. Denki felt his cheeks warm at the memory, but he did not mind. Aizawa entered the classroom and instructed everyone to take their seats, prompting Denki to reluctantly lift Yn away from his side and settle down. Later, they were both looking for Yn's brother so the siblings could talk. Denki pouted and told Yn that he was jealous she had slept through most of first PRD and still knew the answers for the exercises. As they searched, Denki grew nervous at the thought of meeting her brother. He imagined the brother as intimidating and worried about how he might react if he learned about Denki and Yn. Yn, meanwhile, was thinking about how Denki would react to her new hair and how Nijire would probably love it. Denki asked if Yn had told her brother about her pink hair. Yn shrugged and admitted she had not, and the two of them walked through UA's halls looking for Kakashi. Denki could not ignore how nervous he felt about meeting her brother in person. He had seen Kakashi around before but never spoken to him one-on-one. Kakashi had a reputation for being intimidating. He always kept his face level in a way that discouraged approach, and his quirk gave the impression that it was unwise to provoke him. He was almost always surrounded by the same 3 people: Nijire, Tamaki, and Mirio, 2 of whom were bubbly and contrasted sharply with Kakashi, while Tamaki tended to stick close to Kakashi whenever the others got into something they should not. That did not change the impression that Kakashi seemed ready to confront anyone who caused trouble. When they reached the group, Nijire greeted them enthusiastically and immediately complimented Yn's hair, asking if she had dyed it and why she had chosen pink while insisting it suited her. Kakashi stepped closer and told Yn that their father would flip when he saw her hair, then hugged her briefly and ruffled her hair. Yn slapped his hand away and said it did not matter because their father was halfway across the globe anyway. Kakashi asked when she had done it, curious because the last time he had seen her only the tips had been colored. Yn pointed to Denki and explained she had dyed it at his place during a sleepover. Denki offered a small, slightly embarrassed wave. Kakashi recognized Denki and acknowledged him. He then handed YN back her keys, explaining that he could not go home with her because he was staying longer for training and suggesting that Nijire go with her to class. He told Denki he would join YN in a few minutes and would not want her to be late. Kakashi put a hand on Denki's shoulder to keep him from bolting, and Denki felt a chill run through him. Nijire brightened and said she wanted to talk to YN, then skipped off, tugging YN along. YN protested and asked Kakashi not to scare Denki away. Kakashi smiled and reassured his sister that he would be back before her next class. He then told Denki they needed to talk and led him to a quieter stairwell, where Mirio and Tamaki had already slipped away. Denki's panic grew. He had wanted a little alone time with YN, the girl he liked, maybe to buy her something from a vending machine, and now she was being led away while he faced her formidable brother. Denki's fear was not of Kakashi's quirk. They could not use quirks freely in the middle of school anyway, but of Kakashi's knack for reading people. Teachers described Kakashi as a prodigy at understanding others. A single look could make him seem to read someone like an open book. Being visibly nervous only made Denki an easier read, and he had no doubt Kakashi had already figured out much of the situation. Kakashi began by pointing out how close Denki was to his sister and observed from the way Denki acted around her, and from the way he had looked at her earlier, that Denki liked her. Denki's eyes widened and his mouth went dry. Kakashi could read the reaction easily. Kakashi then made it clear he would not punish Denki for liking his sister, though he would act if anyone ever hurt her. He added that his real concern was something else and asked whether Denki knew why YN had been upset that past Saturday. Denki explained that YN had told him she and their father had argued about the sports festival and that he had said something hurtful and inappropriate, which was why she had stayed over at Denki's. Kakashi pressed to know whether she had explained exactly what their father had said, and Denki admitted she had not. He said he had tried to keep her from dwelling on it by suggesting things to cheer her up. He had recommended dyeing her hair, they had watched dramas, and he had helped her with some skincare. Denki smiled proudly at the memory. Kakashi listened and, after a moment of surprise at everything Denki had done for his sister, thanked him quietly. He said he would not tell Denki everything that was YN's choice but stated bluntly that Denki had probably already figured out how awful their father could be. Denki reacted to Kakashi's bluntness, and Kakashi admitted that he and his sister were counting down the days until they could get out of that house. Kakashi explained that he had basically raised YN after their mother died and that a child could not realistically raise another child. He took a deep breath to calm himself and held back from launching into another tirade about their father. He told Denki that YN's relationship with their father was far from good, worse than his and Kakashi's own had been, and that it had taken a toll on her. He asked Denki to keep doing what he had done that weekend because YN had seemed calmer. Kakashi added that their father often flew halfway across the world to avoid talking to her, and that always left her worse. Denki was genuinely shocked and asked if it had happened more than once. Kakashi said their father was often in the papers for supposed business trips, which were actually him getting away after fights with one of them. He declared their father terrible and laughed, an expression that let Denki see some of the sibling similarities. Kakashi told Denki that he liked him and found him funny, wiped a small tear from his eye, and asked Denki to look after YN when he was not around. He asked for Denki's phone. Denki handed his phone to Kakashi. Kakashi put his number in and told Denki to call if he ever needed help. Denki nodded while looking at the new contact. Kakashi added one more request. When internship offers arrived, if YN had their father's name on her list, Kakashi wanted Denki to make sure she did not accept it. He did not want her interning with their father and planned not to do it himself. He asked if Denki could be trusted. Denki agreed and promised to help. Kakashi asked him not to tell YN about their conversation. Denki nodded and went back to class. Sometime later, Denki worried that telling YN not to intern with their father would make her furious, and he was anxious about how Kakashi would react if she chose to go with him. He walked into the classroom and saw everyone holding their internship papers. His paper remained on his desk until YN reached over and compared it to hers. Denki leaned on YN's desk and asked what the papers were. YN said they were internship offers and that she had many, including one from their father. She announced that her father had given her an offer and that she planned to intern with him. Denki warned YN quietly that accepting their father's offer might not be a good idea given their strained relationship. YN replied softly that interning with him might be what their relationship needed and that she preferred working for someone she already knew rather than taking a chance with a new pro-hero. Denki understood how both options made her anxious and skimmed his paper, searching for specific names. Denki told YN that he also had an offer from her father and suggested they do the internship together. YN agreed, teasing that spending a week together and competing would be entertaining. Denki clarified that he hoped for time together and reminded her of how comfortable they had been on the rooftop during the weekend. YN warned him not to push that, and Denki apologized, blushing as he returned to his seat and worried about how Kakashi would react. YN found a crumpled note from a classmate on her desk and felt a surge of annoyance. She put the note away and tried to focus. Denki reflected on being told not to do something. Denki thought it was best to listen when people were warning him. He knew he had messed up somehow, and he smiled to himself at the way he framed it. Denki, a genius who could do no wrong. He and YN were now interning at her father's agency. Her brother's reaction to the news had been intense. Denki could only think that UA had been lucky to have him as a student. Kakashi's control over his quirk was impressive, and Denki admired the way he handled himself. Recovery Girl had asked why Denki smelled faintly of something burned, and he shrugged to himself, thinking Kakashi's quirk was certainly powerful. But he pushed the distraction aside. The internship had started 3 days ago and until now everything had gone smoothly. Since YN's father's agency office was near Kyoto, they had taken the train and the interns were staying at a hotel nearby. The first days had been awkward. Denki had met YN's father and found him intimidating. He did not speak much with the interns, aside from brief morning and evening addresses. Most of the time he retreated to his office. YN had told Denki that her father seldom came to the Kyoto office and usually worked from home. She guessed he came in for the interns. This afternoon YN had been called to stay late because her father wanted to speak with her. She had only said she would meet Denki back at the hotel. Denki sat in his room waiting, bored because YN was the one who made the internship bearable. A knock at the door made him jump to his feet. He had barely finished ignoring Kirishima's text when he opened the door expecting YN. He greeted her warmly and called her a pretty thing, but the smile fell off his face as soon as he saw her. YN stood in the doorway with red, puffy eyes and dry tear tracks on her cheeks. He had not expected to see her like that. Denki pulled YN into the room and held her close. One of his hands rested against the back of her head while the other pressed against her back in slow, circular motions to offer comfort. When her sniffles and whimpers grew louder, he used his foot to close the door so she could let out her sobs without feeling exposed. She folded against him and could barely stand without his support. Denki knew the conversation with her father had gone badly. For days he had tried to limit YN's direct contact with her father, but when the man asked her to speak in his office, Denki could not stop it. He guided YN to his bed so she could sit down. As her breathing quickened and became irregular, Denki loosened his hold and remembered what Kakashi had told him the day before they left for the internship. Kakashi had warned that their father was a trigger for YN's anxiety and that he would likely be unconcerned if it led to a full panic attack, telling Denki to keep an eye on her. Realizing the signs, Denki acted calmly. YN hated panic attacks. She felt as if she were disconnected from her body, overwhelmed by every negative sensation multiplied many times over. The lack of oxygen and the rising panic made her world shrink and every sound and light magnified. She trembled until her muscles cramped, and she had a habit of gripping and pulling her hair to try to anchor herself. Denki gently stopped her and offered his hands instead, telling her not to hurt herself. Took her hands with care and let her squeeze them while he did his best to stay steady. He asked her to look at him, to focus on him, and she shook her head at first. She whispered that she could not. Denki urged her again to try, asking her to look only at his eyes. Her grip on his hands tightened as she gathered herself and tried to meet his gaze. When his yellow eyes met hers, he had to remind himself not to stare. His priority was to help her. Denki reassured YN that it was almost over and asked her to breathe with him, and she gave him a small nod, keeping her gaze fixed on his eyes as she tried to ground herself. He guided her through slow, deep breaths, doing his best to pull her attention away from the panic and towards something steady. Denki asked if she liked the color of his eyes, pointing out that they were a pretty yellow. YN nodded, still focused on his gaze. When he asked what they reminded her of, she said they reminded her of the sunrise from his roof. Denki noticed her grip on his hands had loosened and that her breathing had settled into fewer, more controlled paces. He suggested they should watch the sunrise more often, and she agreed. YN sighed and looked at her lap. Tears still fell, but she could feel herself breathing and was no longer disconnected. Denki handed her a cold water bottle from the nightstand. It was already open. YN thanked him and drank greedily. She apologized, saying this was something he should not have had to see. Denki told her not to apologize, his smile soft despite the firmness in his voice. He reassured her that it was okay to feel anxious and promised he would always be there to help her through it and for anything else she needed. He rested his hand on her cheek and then pulled her into a hug. She gripped the back of his shirt and let her head rest against his chest while he rubbed her back. Denki offered a distraction, suggesting they could eat snacks and watch something on TV until she felt ready to talk. YN said she wanted to tell him now so she could get it over with. Denki told her he would listen to all of it. Chapter end. YN admitted that she did not remember most of her childhood. Every doctor she had seen had told her that her brain was suppressing trauma, not something she could control. She looked down at her hands in her lap while Denki sat across from her on the bed, ready to take in every word. YN explained that her memories were mostly of training or studying, with only rare flashes of genuine happiness from when her mother was still alive. Denki remembered the night he had looked up an article about her mother after she had first visited his home, and he felt guilty for doing it without her knowing. He told her that he had read about her mother and felt ashamed because he thought it was something he should have let her tell him in her own time. He avoided her confused gaze, feeling almost ashamed at having gone through her history without permission. YN replied that he had saved her some time and that she appreciated not having to retell everything. Continuing, YN described how she had always been at her mother's side, the daughter her mother had dreamed of. She remembered her mother smiling even when she got suspended in second grade for punching another child, after that their father had chosen to homeschool her. Denki noticed a small glint of happiness in her eyes when she spoke of her mother, and he hoped that light would never fade. The day of the accident had changed everything. YN named Danzo as the person responsible for her mother's death and said that the loss left her with reminders she carried every day. She asked Denki to promise that no one else would know. Denki promised that he would never betray her trust and that her confidence was something he treasured. YN rolled up her sleeve to reveal a bandage on her bicep. Denki had always wondered about it during hero practice. She unwound the bandage and showed him a burn scar. When she indicated another bandage on her thigh and removed it, it revealed a larger scar. Denki asked if he could look, and she nodded. He examined the scars with gentle concern and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. He met her eyes with admiration and care, and he told her that she would always be the most beautiful person to him and that understanding what she had been through made him respect her even more. YN had never heard anything like that before and did not know how to respond. A single tear traced down her cheek, and that was enough reaction for Denki. YN hugged him suddenly, and Denki surprised himself by returning the embrace. They stood together for a few quiet moments, simply appreciating the other's presence. YN quietly thanked him, a small smile appearing on her lips. Denki realized he was falling in love with her and felt a comforting certainty about that feeling. He rested his forehead gently against her shoulder and traced small, reassuring patterns on her back while she nestled closer. YN continued, saying that her father had changed after her mother's death. He had not wanted a second child but had taken on raising her and her brother, and when her quirk appeared and resembled his, he decided she would become the hero he had never been. Denki watched her as she spoke, noticing that her gaze seemed fixed on the past. He took her hand and intertwined their fingers to remind her that he was there with her in the present. YN inhaled and exhaled, preparing to tell him what no one else knew. Every day their father had trained her in every aspect he could think of, pushing her until she sometimes passed out from exhaustion or overuse of her quirk. A short neutral pause followed before she continued with the next part of her story. YN remembered that when she was 10 she often collapsed from exhaustion because her father pushed her so far. She recalled begging for a single day to recover, but he always refused and threatened that if she stayed weak, more harm would come to the family because of her. YN laughed bitterly as fresh tears slipped down her face, and Denki held her close. She told Denki about the time she had been at his house after another fight with her father. He had said she should have died instead of her mother and called her worthless, then the next day attended press events smiling for the cameras. Denki struggled to control his feelings. He could not understand how someone could treat their child that way and then be admired by others, while YN barely managed to keep going. Still, she would be the first to step in and confront anyone who insulted her father. Denki asked why she still defended him, reminding her how much it hurt. YN admitted that deep down she still hoped he cared for her like a father should, and she longed for the small, ordinary gestures other children experienced, being picked up from school and taken for ice cream in the park. She began to cry again, and Denki did not blame her. He felt a genuine hope that he could help her. YN said that her father had never given her a choice and that she had only wanted to choose her own life. Denki promised to give her the choices she needed. They remained in that position until YN fell asleep and Denki finally allowed himself to sleep as well. Before he drifted off, Denki promised to love her the way she deserved.